Imagine you're a scientist who is passionate about their next breakthrough. You are tasked with unearthing the body of none other than a woolly mammoth. It's incredible. The animal is almost fully intact after centuries of being preserved in ice. Imagine what you could find out about their diet or way of life. I mean, the possibilities of learning more about these creatures seem endless. Now, imagine you are told to try and replicate their genome. The CIA themselves are funding this project and want answers as soon as possible. And when you ask about why their DNA needs to be replicated, you are told that the goal is to try to bring the mammoths out of extinction and back to life. As to why this project is necessary, you are told that the reasoning is on a need-to-know basis. No one seems to know why the CIA wants to unearth creatures of a world gone past that maybe should have stayed buried. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Why is it suspicious that the CIA is funding a scientific project? Well, the CIA is part of the government. Why wouldn't the government want to fund projects that advanced scientific learning? This is something that benefits everyone, right? Well, not exactly. For starters, it's important to know what the CIA is. The CIA stands for the Central Intelligence Agency. It is a branch of the United States government that acts as a civilian foreign intelligence service. The CIA mainly focuses on protecting the U.S. from espionage, international attacks, and focusing on national security in general. So why would a branch of the government fund a scientific excavation on an animal? Seems a little off topic for a branch of the government that focuses on security. Well, when you learn the truth about some of the CIA's previously funded projects, you too may be suspicious of this current endeavor. Now, specifically, the CIA has been involved in funding and creating multiple projects that range from the existentially hilarious to the downright bizarre. For example, in the early 1960s, Operation Midnight Climax was one of the many of the CIA's most controversial projects, to say the least. And if you don't know, it involved using prostitutes to lure men into empty rooms that were equipped with one-way mirrors. From there, the prostitute was tasked to give the young men drinks laced with LSD. The purpose of this assignment was so that the CIA agents on the other side of the mirror could observe the effects of LSD on the mind and see if it could be used to manipulate people for the purpose of confessions or even leaking sensitive military or government information. Of course, the CIA learned the hard way that drugged up people don't have the best attention span and have a tendency to hallucinate and not make any sense in general. Imagine that. So, after a few years, the project was ultimately tossed out. Sadly, the CIA did use the embarrassing and sensitive footage of some of these men they lured for blackmail purposes. I guess we can't quite put that past Big Brother, can we? Now, strange assignments like this were not an isolated incident either. Project Stargate lasted over 20 years. It was a project designed to research and harness psychic abilities. The idea was that people could harness their untapped talent to perform tasks like remote viewing, where a subject could see what was happening in another room or even in another country without actually physically being there. The project was ultimately scrapped after decades of research, as the CIA claimed the project was an untimely failure. However, in more recent years, many people who have claimed to have been test subjects for the CIA's experiments have now come forward and claimed that this wasn't true and the project was actually a success. Most notably, one of the most famous CIA projects, as well as one of the most controversial, is, many of you out there watching this know, MK Ultra. Now, for those that aren't educated on it, MK Ultra was the idea that using drugs and hypnosis, people could be mind-controlled to just about do anything. Now, keep in mind that is a TLDR version. Too long didn't read for you old-timers out there. I am not going in-depth to the conspiracy, but that's, in a nutshell, what it meant. Now, for years, this was a conspiracy theory. From the 1990s to even now, hundreds of people have come forward to say that the project really did happen and they were the ones experimented on. Now, for many years, most people did not believe these alleged witnesses. However, in recent years, more and more documentation is coming out to suggest that this project really did happen. As a matter of fact, MKUltra even appeared in the official CIA manual of trickery and deception. Anyone notice a theme here? I mean, after all, it doesn't seem like they have a trail of truth following them. The CIA has been behind a lot of the almost paranormal-like experiments and projects, but why? Well, historically, one thing all these projects have in common is that they were funded at around the same time, from the 1950s to the 1990s. Most of these projects peaked in the 60s. Now, this era in American history is known as the Cold War era. The Cold War is not necessarily a war with boots on the ground, but more of a war on an idea. The war was on the spread of communism, which was seen as a threat to not only Western economies, but security. So, the CIA used, or attempted to use, as the CIA claims, metaphysical means of fighting the Soviets. Does this have something to do with funding the revival of woolly mammoths? No, it's very rare that the government itself will fund projects like these. I mean, mainly because it doesn't benefit them directly. Usually, private organizations, universities, or for-profit groups will fund such research projects. This is why it became news when the U.S. biotechnology company Colossal Biosciences had been receiving its funding for de-extinction research on various animals directly from the CIA. Again, what would a national defense agency want from an animal research biosciences group? I mean, how would they benefit? Well, oddly, this isn't the first time the CIA has used animals in their projects either. I mean, during the Cold War, the CIA did successfully knock a cat out and insert a microphone into its ear. The wire of the microphone was implanted so it ran down the cat's belly and into its hip. The CIA planned on using the recordings the unassuming cat picked up and seeing if any of the information was useful. This plan did not last long, though, as the CIA very quickly discovered that cats are not easy to train and do not stay in one place for long. Now, additionally, the CIA backed a plan that involved pigeons being placed inside of missiles for purposes of assisting the guidance of said missiles. There was minor success with the program, but the CIA stopped funding it very quickly because even they thought the plan was weird. Now, lastly, the CIA designed microphones to spy on enemies by disguising them as dragonflies in the 1970s. Now, this plan worked well as it evolved into an underwater plan in the 90s that recreated this idea but with fake fish. The first was designed to be waterproof and pick up on sonar signals from enemy submarines. So, clearly, the CIA is no stranger to using animals in their espionage. But why extinct animals? This is a mission that is going to cost millions of dollars over the course of years. Using animals that already exist seems to make a lot more sense. Well, there are a few theories out there as to why the CIA would benefit from unearthing the bones of animals long since passed and bringing them back out into the modern ecosystem. In fact, one theory is that the CIA has been putting seed money into biomechanical engineering projects, regardless of what they're about, just so they can compete with China, who is heavily funding their own bioengineering experiments. This is not an unreasonable theory, given that the CIA has funded obscure projects before, just because the Soviets were doing it and the US wanted to get answers from the same experiments first. Others have theorized that it isn't necessarily the quest to bring back the woolly mammoth that has the CIA interested, but rather the idea of engineering DNA and embryos that has the government interested. Why have soldiers when you can engineer super soldiers? Why have children born with potential disabilities when you could be the first country that discovers how you can safely tailor the DNA of a child so no child has to be born with a debilitating illness ever again. Autism, cerebral palsy, mental retardation, the list goes on and on. Can you imagine having an entire society, a populace of people with no physical or mental illnesses? It's coming. Now, not to mention that now that the human population has reached 8 billion, what if more animals and fish could be created in a lab for consumption? If it can be done with this mammoth, imagine what else the experiment could replicate. Of course, there are others who are more concerned that funding this project might have a darker undertone. What if this is a cover for a much darker purpose? The New York Times discovered in the early 2000s that both Bush Jr. and Clinton were funding projects for the research and engineering of biological warfare, despite it being a direct violation of the '72 treaty. Was the CIA behind convincing these former presidents that this was a good idea? More importantly, is this funding of the mammoth a cover to fill more research behind the scenes on a biological warfare? If funding is going to a project but being filtered to a more nefarious project, the CIA would have the first project as a cover to explain where the funding is going. I mean, makes sense, right? Now, further on that idea, what if the funding for cloning mammoths is really going to funding people? I mean, if you could figure out how to replicate a mammoth, why not a person? Imagine the possibilities of cloning a person. More soldiers, organ harvesting, espionage. I mean, the possibilities are literally endless, especially from a moral perspective. But perhaps the CIA isn't looking for possibilities that are just of this world. As mentioned, the CIA has funded projects that were intended to push the boundary between sci-fi and reality. As the CIA claimed, the projects were a failure, but according to hundreds of eyewitnesses, former employees, and even alleged participants in the same experience, they all claim it was a success. So, whose word do we take here? Now, allegedly, some of these CIA experiments are happening even to this day. Paul Smith was a recruit for the CIA. Today, he works in Utah to teach people remote viewing, astral projection, and seeing into others' minds. Paul claims he learned these techniques specifically from his old job at the CIA. Really makes you wonder what on earth they're doing in those bunkers underground. Now, Paul stated in an interview with the KUER 90.1, "While I was in what became known as the Stargate program, I was an operational remote viewer, which meant that I actually did applied remote viewing projects to try and gain intelligence information from potential foreign threats." His story is not an isolated one. Many former CIA agents and trainees have come forward to say that the idea of remote viewing was not only pretty successful with a select few candidates, but that it was practiced for much longer and more intensely than the CIA has admitted. In 1979, a small team was able to locate lost missiles in the first Gulf War and plutonium in North Korea in the mid-90s. In the late 90s, a man came forward on a public radio station and identified himself as John Doe. Now, John claimed that he was able to get into a deep cycle of REM sleep, where he was trained to maintain control and awareness during this state. While in this dream state, John would have his spirit fly into different locations to find lost items. Now, due to his talent of remote viewing, the CIA decided to up the ante and see if he could see through the eyes of others. John trained for weeks to be in a state of possession wherein John would occupy the body of someone else, but not the full mind. This is already sounding pretty freaky. John could read the thoughts and feel what his new body would feel, but as he described, the occupant of the body would still be in control. John would go back to describe to his employers what was going on in the minds of others in order to establish help and a motive, as well as predict the next move of the target. But John's story isn't even the strangest. Documents and witnesses involving Project Blue Book show that the CIA is well versed in researching what is not of this world, as well as creatures who are not of this world. You see, Project Blue Book was designed as a mission to research UFOs as more and more were being reported after the infamous Roswell crash. Now, this project started off with good intentions, or so we're told, and the belief was that the UFOs may be Soviet planes used for espionage and therefore were a threat to national security. However, as time passed and more information was uncovered, the project became stranger. After years of categorizing different types of crafts, the CIA decided to take it a step further and start conducting experiments on these same crafts as well as the creatures who created them. Now, in recent years, Bob Lazar, a former engineer for the U.S. military, came out to discuss the work he did involving U.S.-backed funds to research an alien craft. He described the CIA as well as the U.S. military being successful in their attempt to keep others quiet about the information by separating employees into very specific aspects of research that were never to overlap. So each researcher was only given a small piece of information and a task to focus on. The researchers were forbidden to speak to each other for fear of combining their information to create a bigger picture and jeopardizing the secrecy of the mission. Lazar was able to get most information due to his specialty and knowledge of propulsion systems. He also saw the craft in person and was told that it was merely a new craft the U.S. was working on. Now, he claimed he knew better and knew a spaceship when he saw one. Lazar and many others talked about how the research had escalated into the U.S. government being hungry for more information surrounding who was creating these impossible crafts. Astral projection and remote viewing were the few resources that the government felt humanity had in being able to know more about creatures from beyond our stratosphere. Billions of dollars got lost in an endless paper trail that was labeled under the vague term defense budget. Now, many former employees of the U.S. government claim that this budget was where the resources came from. And if the budget was vague enough in its description, then the funding technically wasn't fraud and was therefore legal. Ingo Swann, a former employee of the CIA, specialized in remote viewing. In the 90s, he was tasked with viewing foreign planets to see if they were habitable, and if anyone already inhabited them. Now, Swann performed a remote viewing of Jupiter where he claimed that the surface was covered in sand dunes and crystals. He also claimed to see mountain ranges and liquid within the mountains. Now, a similar experiment was performed a few years later where Swann was asked to up the ante and try to do a remote viewing of an alien itself. Swann did a viewing of an alien woman and was jolted out of his trance when he realized the alien's surrounding looked familiar, human even. Swann could tell from the surroundings that the alien was in a supermarket in Los Angeles. This led him to believe that aliens were walking among us disguised as humans. Interestingly, this was one of many times that the CIA funded alien viewing experiments after this case. Specifically, time travel was allegedly heavily funded by the CIA. One famous person who made this claim was a former employee of the CIA named Andrew Basiago. It's either Basiago or Basiago. Andrew stated that his father first brought him into the travel when he was a boy, due to his father being a U.S. government employee. Now, Andrew claimed his father helped manage teleportation devices that were occasionally used by the CIA and U.S. military. Andrew never used the teleportation device to travel through time, as he states that the teleportation is meant for transport, not time travel. To use it for the time travel would be one way, and he claimed that the CIA originally had a way to view the past as if through a TV screen, kind of like the chronovisor, if you guys remember that video right up here. But by the 1970s, the images became more like a hologram. The hologram was placed in Bell Labs, New Jersey. Andrew claimed he was sent to the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln's assassination. Now, in one instance, Andrew would use a device that ran on radioactive plasma he claimed was also funded by the CIA that would connect people to wormholes that people could collapse into to step into different times. Andrew used a famous picture of the Gettysburg Address as proof of his travels. There is a famous photo of a young boy walking among the soldiers at Gettysburg. The boy is clearly wearing sneakers and has a haircut and clothes that were stylish in the 1970s. Andrew claimed the boy was none other than himself. Andrew further claimed that many CIA officials had time traveled themselves, but had their mind erased by higher-ups in the government. Andrew stated that his memory wasn't erased because he was still young at the time. The idea was that because he was young, he may not remember his childhood anyway, so no one bothered to wipe his memory. Unfortunately for the CIA, that may have been too optimistic. Andrew further claimed that the device in New Jersey could be used to teleport to other planets, such as Mars. Andrew also mentioned that the surface of Mars was very desert-like and even had ice and various caves. Now, the purpose of this trip was reportedly to see if life can be held on the surface of the planet, and according to Andrew, it can. As a matter of fact, very recently in 2021, the CIA finally leaked some of their documents to the public regarding alien life and UFOs. The public swarmed on these stories for how insane they were, ranging from well-known Roswell crash to the Grudge Project that was intended to gaslight the public into thinking UFOs were not real. One story in particular caught a lot of interest due to the CIA's involvement with alien life. That, my friends, is known as Project Serpo. Now, Project Serpo was an exchange program between the U.S. government and an alien planet identified as Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system. The project was allegedly established by the alien that survived the Roswell crash. In the infamous crash where a UFO crash landed outside of a farm in Roswell, New Mexico, 2 aliens were supposed to be in the craft, and only one survived. Now, Project Serpo was supposed to be the project that was established when the alien that survived received treatment and good care from the military. The government then wanted to reconnect the alien to his home planet and get him out of Earth as quickly as possible, which resulted in connecting with that alien's home planet. The alien was then used as a way to establish a good relationship with an extraterrestrial group. In Project Serpo, it was revealed that at least a dozen U.S. members of the CIA and military have been between these planets. Unfortunately, most of the members of the party died shortly after being exposed to incredibly high levels of radiation from the foreign planet. The CIA was not aware that the alien planet had high levels of radiation, but the traveling members took the risk of being exposed to foreign materials when they traveled between planets. Interestingly, the 2 members who did not die requested to stay on the planet. In the project documents, it clearly states that the 2 members were given permission to stay on the alien planet. Thousands of pages on the CIA cover-ups and dealing with alien life were published only just recently. Could this be a way of letting the public slowly ease into the idea that we may not be alone? After years of funding projects to discredit witnesses who claim to see UFO using propaganda campaigns, it is pretty funny to see the CIA step back on some of their former policies. I mean, after all, in the 60s, we had the whole reefer madness and the entire campaign against cannabis, and look how that's backfired. And then again, would the CIA have backed money to bring back mammoths a few decades ago? Probably not. If this were a project in the 1960s, it probably would have been seen as immoral. Now, it's being heavily funded by the CIA. So, from time travel to reanimating extinct animals to aliens, the CIA has been documented to be behind a lot of these surprising projects. The one clear pattern between all these projects is that they all result on gaining the upper hand, whether it's on information, scientific advancement, or technology. So, if learning about aliens gives the CIA the upper hand in information and technology, well, time travel gives the CIA the upper hand in, scientific advancement? What does recreation of extinct animals give the CIA? Is it the information on cloning the human genome? Is it the scientific advancement of competing with China? Perhaps it is the technology to finally engineer super soldiers. So the next time you go to work, ask yourself, where is your money really going? What do you guys think? Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you all. Also, if you're a fan of storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural, be sure to go ahead and subscribe for more content just like this. As always, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll catch you guys in the very next video.